Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new operational paradigm, building a personnel-focused future. My name is Laura Louise Green. I am out of Chicago, Illinois. I'm a licensed professional counselor and the founder of Healthy Pour with nearly 20 years of hospitality experience. So excited to have you today and to have all of these wonderful professionals here with me to talk a little bit about the future of hospitality and how we can run our businesses a little better and safer and more mindful, and to help people thrive within the spaces where we work, and continue to expand what it means to be a hospitality professional and what the hospitality industry looks like. A little note that I want to point out as we get started is that the date today, as we're recording this, is August 2nd, and I recognize that a lot of the world is changing, even at this point, at a day-by-day basis. Things are changing. I'm seeing it here in Chicago, I'm seeing here globally. So as we embark on this conversation, we are definitely looking to the future, recognizing that change does take time, but also, as we talk about this, knowing that we are coming due from the past. So keep that in mind as we do discuss things, that things might be a little bit different by the time this reaches you. So let's go ahead and get started. I will allow our guests, our panelists, to speak for themselves, to introduce themselves, since they probably do it way better than I would be able to anyway. So let's go ahead and get started with Marlena.
Hello. Hey, Laura. Thanks so much for the introduction. My name is Marlena Edwards. I am the Chief People Officer at a marketing and advertising agency in St. Louis called HLK. I have been in the marketing and advertising industry for the last almost 20 years, primarily focused on people and the people experience. So I think that there is a lot to cover off on, so many different things to talk about, changing times and how we keep our people engaged and making sure they're taking care of both their mental and physical health in the process.
I was muted. Happy to have you. Thank you so much. Zoom. All right, Meaghan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meaghan Dorman. I'm the bar director of Rains Law Room and Dear Irving in New York City. So I oversee 4 cocktail venues at the moment, but I did start with Rains Law Room in 2009 as a bartender on the opening team. So my own role has evolved over the past 12 to 13 years now, and I'm excited to share my insights about building a culture that prioritizes collaboration and promoting from within.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, Mika.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's Mika from Helsinki, Finland. I'm a bar manager at Lily Lee Restaurant and Bar and the founder of Mate Hospitality. So I started bartending 9 years ago, and a bit over 2 of those years I spent in Australia, mainly working at Bulletin Place, Sydney. Now, unfortunately, the venue has now closed its doors, but Bulletin Place gave me practical knowledge on what it is to work as close as possible to a self-managed cocktail bar. And, combining that with some frameworks I've learned from different industries, I'm sharing my findings and tools through the Mate Hospitality platform. I'm all about, reinventing the way we run bars and advocating for bartenders' self-management, wholeness, and purpose.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you. And Miranda, Breedlove.
Hello, my name is Miranda Breedlove. I am the National Director of Bars for Hyatt's Lifestyle Division. I work with more than 50 properties in US, Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean, countless outlets, but I'm excited to talk today about wellness in the space of a larger organization and how to kind of inspire and give your teams the space to grow in a positive way.
Thank you, Miranda. And Rachel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Ramsey, and I am the owner and principal consultant for Measured HR. I've been in the hospitality industry for about 15 years, in every role from executive chef to general manager to HR director. Primarily, I work with small businesses, small restaurants, and I help them in every area of HR. I'm excited to be here today and talk a little bit about my demographic with what small businesses and small restaurants are seeing and what I hope for their future, right? I'm very excited about what I can see in the horizon and implementing those new things and really changing the landscape of what mental health and benefits really looks like.
Thank you. Y'all, I'm stoked. I think this is going to be a really great conversation with a lot to think about for sure. Even with you all introducing yourselves, I was like, oh my gosh, like my brain is firing. Also, I wanted to say that I put everyone in alphabetical order for that, but everyone's name for the most part starts with M. And I was like, oh, that was so unhelpful. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. So in terms of framework with this conversation, we wanted to set up 3 different pillars to capture what we're talking about, and maybe put them into little buckets and make them a little clearer. And those 3 pillars are transparency, abundance, and wholeness. So with that, we will start with transparency. So what is transparency in the workplace? Marlena, I'll go ahead and throw that over to you.
Yeah, so, transparency comes up a lot, at least in my career it has, and it really has been, how much do you share? How much do you communicate? What do you want employees to know? I think that when you're an owner or a CEO or a leader, a lot of times we can get bogged down in trying to solve for what we think will motivate people. So I used to partner with a leader who said at one point, I don't really want employees to really worry about the financials, right? I want them to do the thing that makes them feel great. I want them to innovate. I want them to be curious. And so as leaders, we'll worry about the financials. I think I lean more towards radical transparency, because if you have people who are creating, sooner or later, they're going to want to grow into leadership positions, right? And what radical transparency is that I'm going to share all of the information that allows us to be who we are. Some of the things are, tougher conversations to have or bigger problems to solve. But if you're giving somebody all of the information that they need to whether it be understand what their career looks like future forward, what it takes to be an owner, to understand financials, not just the job that you're in right now. But transparency is really communicating what's happening in and around us to make sure that people feel fully supported, have access to information, and hopefully understand why decisions are made, when they're made, and how they're made.
I love that. The point that you brought up about, talking about only sharing what makes people feel good. I think we ran into, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, but throughout, we run into that quite a lot, where leadership shares only the things that they're certain of, or they know, or that's going to be good news, while withholding maybe the things that were really on people's minds. Rachel, I'm gonna throw it over to you. Can you speak a little bit about how to broach subjects that are maybe a little bit more challenging to talk about, or subjects that you don't necessarily have the answers to?
Sure. I think that when you're talking about topics that are difficult in general, right? I think first acknowledging that you as a leader, you don't have all the answers, right? That is transparency in and of itself. Essentially getting on the level of the person you're discussing this with. A great example is throughout the pandemic and all of the social justice things that were going on, a lot of the organizations that I worked with, they were focused not only on just saying what's right, they were focused on listening and coming to the table and understanding where their employees were, right? And so those difficult conversations that may have been scary to go into, they became easier conversations, and they learned so much was learned just because they came into the conversation with open transparency and not being afraid to say something wrong or have the wrong answer, right? So I think that's the best mindset to lead into a conversation that might be difficult. But I think piggybacking on what was said earlier, a lot of roles and a lot of the growth in restaurants has been stagnated because there isn't transparency. You don't know what your bar manager is doing, right? And that information, say for instance, that person leaves. If that manager leaves, that historical data, that historical knowledge is gone. And so what we're finding in restaurants is if you're transparent about what is happening, what each role does, how they do it, et cetera, you will be better off in the long run. And so with my restaurants that I'm working with, that's one of the things that I'm working on, ensuring that the historical data is never lost and that you're transparent about the roles, you're transparent about who does what, everyone understands each level so that it is easier to get to the next level.
I love that. And you brought up a lot of really interesting points, like thinking about the anxiety leading up to having a conversation that might be uncomfortable, but once you start having the conversation, the anxiety dissipates. So it's like, if you don't have that conversation, it just like builds and builds and builds. And that definitely doesn't feel good. But the part also about sharing information and, you know, having all of this historical data, and, you know, it made me think a little bit about the burden that comes with when you keep all the information for yourself in a certain position, that you are totally, then everyone is totally reliant on you for that information. And that starts to cut into like work-life balance stuff, you know, because you always have to be accessible with that information. Meaghan, can you speak a little bit? Oh, sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
I was just going to say that creates an undue burden on you, right? And it speaks to your mental health, because then you feel like I have to be here, right? I have to always be present. I have to always pick up my phone. I have to always be available to everyone. But in reality, if you were to delegate or to allow others in on your role and give them maybe small pieces, that pressure will be gone. I think it's something we have to practice. A lot of leaders want to hold on to everything, and it's very difficult to let go, but that's something you have to do in practice over time.
Yeah, and then you're able to take steps away too, because you know that you cannot be in that space physically, and you're still taken care of, like the whole situation is still taken care of. Meaghan, can you speak a little bit to the sharing of information as a leader and the transparency of just knowledge and growth and how those things come together?
Yeah, so along the lines of what Rachel was saying, I had to build systems to share information because I had at one point boxed myself into the corner of being the only person that knew a lot of things. And you know, I was only working in one location, so I didn't actually realize it until we were thinking about opening another location. And to not physically be on site meant it couldn't just be verbal, had to be written down in a way. But once I was working on those documents, I started sharing them, not just amongst the bartenders or people in certain roles, but with everyone. So everyone had access. And it paired with this feeling that I was getting, both in my own venues and others, to eliminate the word just, as in I'm just a host or just a bar back, because it was like, I was realizing people don't have the information, they don't have the agency to speak about their favorite drink or the menu or a recipe. And I wanted that growth mindset. So I was sharing more information. When we started doing more education for the bartenders and formalizing that, everyone was invited, back of the house, front of the house, management, anyone that was interested, even people that were interviewing, I would invite to education. And that allowed people to learn. It allowed people that are a little newer into the industry to learn on their own time, because these documents, you know, live on Evernote, live on a Google Drive. They can go to them whenever they feel comfortable. And it really has allowed us to be more nimble in reopening, that so many people are cross-trained, are comfortable with different roles. And it's allowed a lot of people to move up through different roles. Even our head bartender right now at Deer Irving started as a dishwasher, has been a server, has been a bar back, a floor manager, a bartender, and now the head bartender. And that's all like evolving, absorbing more information and helping me share it down the line as we get busier and busier.
So what does that feel like for you in terms of, sharing information versus gatekeeping the information? Like Rachel spoke a little bit about, we spoke about like the mental health that comes with that. So what does it feel like to know that people have that information?
It feels great because one of the spurs to me working on this more was I'm a twin and my sister was pregnant and I was like, I am on call for the twin, right? As soon as this happens. So I really pushed myself to make sure everybody was ready for me to take time off and really not be, truly be out of office. So that was a push. And then just seeing also people's growth as I knew we were expanding, having people ready to step up to other roles, having people feel comfortable, coming to education, not feeling like it was only for bartenders or only for people of a certain level. I immediately saw the reward in sharing more, and it pushed me to make that even more part of the culture and lean into it even more as now we have 4 locations.
I want to put a pin in that because when we get to abundance, that's definitely bringing in some more like abundance mindset versus scarcity. So let's put a pin in that, and folks starting in at home, keep that in your brain. I want to ask Miranda, as someone who maybe isn't accessible in person to your properties that you work with, to all the bars that you work with, how do you share?
It's a great question.
Like how do you share all of this information so that you can manage yourself and your life, and so that the spaces that you're responsible for are also functioning in a way that is growth oriented and whatnot?
That's a constantly evolving answer for me. But I do just really quick want to go back to something Rachel said that I think is really pertinent to this. The concept of having to be available, like, answer your phone all the time. It almost works a little bit in the reverse as well. Like I worked for a larger organization before this job that paid for my cell phone bill essentially every month. And the other side of that was that you have to answer if they call. If something is wrong, you have to be available all the time. And it put me in a pretty stressed out position. It's hard to sleep when you feel like you have to worry that your phone's going to ring, but it really put me in a place to know that that's how I wanted to lead. Like I wanted to make sure that I was respecting the time of the people around me in every position. And, I work on a corporate schedule, so it's Monday 9 to 5, but that doesn't mean that our teams aren't working on the weekends. So I try to check people's calendars before I send emails to make sure that they're not out of office, or just really, trying to be conscious of the time that they have, because I know that if I send something, they're going to feel like they have to respond at this point. So it's just, it's an interesting point to bring up. But in the sharing of information side of things, thankfully we have a massive amount of resources online and cloud sharing formats that are really easy to use. But one of my things that I was really passionate about doing when I started in this job was we had a website that we were working on that would share all of our beverage resources, like any kind of, bar manuals or classic specs, or, all the big general stuff. It's where I put things like mental health information. It's where I put the competitions that I would recommend, or the conferences that I'd like to take our teams to. And with Hyatt, I found out pretty quickly that they don't get really excited if you put Hyatt in a domain name, and they fought me really hard on making it public. And they wanted it to be, I won't say they fought, they pushed against making it public, and they wanted to be, they wanted it to just live on the internal site. But for me, coming up in this industry as a bartender and seeing the different ways that people kind of operate, where either they keep everything really close to the vest, they don't want you to know how they made this ingredient and this drink, they don't want to really share that information, to the side of the way that I was able to learn by, all of the shared resources online. Like I remember when Chris Lauder put a bunch of stuff on the internet, and I read every single bit of it, and it gave me so much information that I didn't have. So I was pretty passionate about saying, if we're going to do this, it's going to be available to everybody. And so that was 3 months later, I got the HyattLifestyleBars.com domain name up and running. So it exists for the world, and it's something I use a lot when I'm talking with people outside of the company I work for. It's like, oh, I have these resources, and they're all in one place. But along that, within our teams internally, it's really seemed to be important for me to remind them all of the time that exists, because I think we're all pulled in a lot of different directions, and you'll forget that that resource is there. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't have that information. It's like, oh no, it's here. Just remember, like we talked about this, you know, and not making them feel bad, but just making sure that they're always aware that that's an option for them.
Miranda, you bring up a good point about people forgetting that the resources are there. I think as a, you know, as a industry culture, and even within our individual organizations, as we do shift to a more transparent, you know, operational transparency and communication and whatnot, people do, it can be jarring to know so much, because, you know, and it can be uncomfortable to start having access to these spaces when we're so accustomed to having things so compartmentalized and kept from us. So that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing all of that. So helpful. Mika, can you speak a little bit to the framework that you work within? And I want to hear about access to different information and access also to the decision-making processes within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the transparency in the teal mindset is about the fact that people are recognized as adults, as, you know, capable beings. So they are trusted with the good and the bad news, and even the sensitive ones. So this could include the previously mentioned, you know, salaries or sales data or targets and budgets. So when everyone knows those things, it's easier to, you know, understand what's expected from you. So you could enter meetings as a listener, perhaps. I think Meaghan mentioned that as well. So it's part of a internal, growing method of sharing the standards and sharing the like consistent knowledge across the board. And I think, like, from the self-management perspective, we've seen that during the last 5 to 10 years, the shift from the power, like it's been shifted from the top more to the edges of the company and right to the customer interface. So if we want to make decisions at that level, it's really important to have all the knowledge available, so then you can make the best possible decisions. Let's say someone needs a little compensation for a delayed meal or something. Maybe you don't have to run to your manager to ask if I can do this and this, or maybe you can just pour them a glass of champagne and you're allowed to do that. And I don't want to use the word empowered to do that, but they're simply powerful to do that. So that's part of the collective, you know, decision making. And those who do, they should plan instead of just obeying something coming from above, who might be a bit unknowledge of the actual real customer interface problems or things at the moment. So that's part of the teal idea, the worldview, the paradigm. That is really the future. I've seen it happening already.
Yeah, I mean, that the mindsets of, I mean, even what we're talking about today, the transparency and abundance and, you know, psychological safety in spaces is becoming more and more, you know, giving power away, like building power by giving power away. That's all about, you know, these different pieces. And it definitely is the future. I want to point out to those of you listening at home that, or wherever you are, I don't know, you could be on the train, that we are going to be providing a whole bunch of resources for you to continue learning more about these different concepts as well on your own, beyond these minutes that you're spending with us. I want to talk a little bit before we move into abundance. I want to talk about failure a little bit, especially since with change comes inevitably comes failure, and you know what that might look like in a transparent context. Miranda, I'll throw that to you.
I have to say that I think personally, most of the most important lessons that I've learned have been through failing in some way or shape or form. And in the last year and a half, trying to operate on a large scale with a lot of different markets in a lot of different places, we kind of came to the point where we realized that now is absolutely the time to try anything and fail fast if you're going to fail. So feeling comfortable saying, like, this is okay, it's not working, we're going to change and we're going to do it again and we're going to try something else. And I kind of took that that mind frame with me. And it's kind of in a one-on-one sense an interesting way to teach through failure, like choosing when you will know that somebody is going to do something that maybe won't, that you're pretty certain won't work, and instead of stopping them, having them kind of go through that process and learning a lesson. And there's definitely a really fine balance between, you know, letting them make that mistake and what it can cost a business, what it can cost someone personally, but what, you know, what kind of a growth mindset that can put them in to say like, oh, I tried something, it didn't make sense, and now I understand why. Because in this industry, it seems like a lot of the people that we work with, they do best when they understand why you're doing what you're doing and not just being told. So taking the opportunity to allow people to fail as long as you follow through and make sure that, you know, there's that lesson there and that they're growing forward in a positive way is really impactful in the hospitality industry for me.
Thank you. Marlena, what are your thoughts on communicating failure and communicating mistakes? I would say both from a leadership and from a more like hourly perspective, or sort of on those frontline roles.
Yeah, I think communicating failure, I think, is equally as important as communicating successes. I think that it solidifies that if you do have that fail fast kind of culture and are pushing people to really kind of create and be innovative, not everything is going to stick. We know that everything is not going to land. But I think that when you are discussing failures and breaking down why things didn't work, you're also sharing information, and that goes back to transparency as well. So I think that showing how an organization and leaders work through problems, how we came to this thought process. You know, if you're in HR, any organization, you're probably living through engagement surveys. And so, you know, the number one rule is making sure you're actioning what is coming out of those insights from those surveys. And sometimes the things that you try to solve for certain challenges are not always going to be the things that work or the things that stick. But communicating how you came up with that idea for a solution and then talking through why you needed to adjust or shift, I think is equally as important. And you're also sharing your learning process, right? And so when you think about quote unquote failures, it is really just a learning process. One of the creative agencies that I worked for in the past had a famous really kind of mindset, which was iterate, iterate, iterate. And so if you shift that mindset from failure to iteration, right? Like we're just going to try something else if that's not working the way that we wanted. And I think that that's how you really share with employees. So if you're talking about like first line level employees or first level managers, it is, you know what, like, let's talk about it. Let's break down what was the challenge? What were the problems that we were trying to solve, or what were we trying to solve for? And then in breaking down what really worked, what didn't, why it didn't, and how do we iterate? How do we move forward? So that would be my suggestion for all levels of employees in any organization, is looking at that challenge, talking through why the decisions were made, how we ended up where we ended up. Is it working? And if not, how do we iterate and move forward?
Thank you. I love that iterate. That's amazing. I mean, I think we could do that for this entire industry right now and be like, okay, that was one iteration. And now we're moving into, you know, that whole thing, like, you haven't even seen my final form. Like, you know, it's looking like that, or I don't know, like Pokemon or something. Oh my God, that's horrible. With that, I'm going to move into abundance, because a lot of what we've been saying about transparency actually feeds very well into adopting an abundance mindset as opposed to a scarcity mindset. Rachel, can you speak a little bit to what that might look like in a workplace?
Sure. You know, for me, with my clients, abundance is really number one, understanding what your employees need in this space, right? So not just saying, you know, this is the policy we're going to have because this is trendy. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to implement it. But really finding, and to, you know, Marlena's point, taking those employment engagement surveys and actually creating policies and new things around what those employees are saying, right? So taking that data and actually using it. And so for my clients, having a atmosphere of abundance has been iterating what their employees need and the things that are going to make them whole employees. And so some examples of that has been for a female-led team, right? Ensuring that they have additional pregnancy leave on top of what has been mandated by the state. For other clients who are interested in financial well-being, they are ensuring that not only are we offering 401k programs, we're also offering literacy programs to align with that, so that it's not just a benefit. We are ensuring that there is an abundance of policies that speak to you as a whole person, not just how much I pay you, but what you do with your money outside of this organization. So those are some of the ways that we are lacing in abundance into the things that we do every day in HR.
I love that. The creativity that comes with providing benefits lately has been a very exciting thing to watch businesses implement. Like I think about Jay Rieger, who is a distillery in Kansas City, who one of their benefits is that they will pay the adoption fee if somebody wants to adopt an animal. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's really great. I was just talking to a neighbor of mine who's one of the benefits offered through her workplace is pet insurance. Like I have pets on the brain, but like that's
pet insurance is big right now because people, I mean, they love their pets just as that's their children, right? And it's amazing. One other thing that I saw that I'm actually thinking of implementing is benefits for you as not just your current situation or how you are, what your future is, right? So if you decide, you know what, I want to be a lawyer, right? So we will pay benefits for educational and tuition benefits for that. So that's something that my clients are looking into as well. This industry normally has a time frame on it. Some people stay here forever, but the reality is the longevity of a chef or a bartender standing on their feet 24 hours, that's not real. And so you have to start thinking about your next step. And that's something that we have started to implement as well. What do you want to do next? And being open to that allows our employees to really think twice, like, wow, this is a good organization. They don't just care about me now, they're looking into our future. So those are some of the things that we want to do.
Gosh, that's a tremendous thing to talk about. And I think we're going to go there a little bit, is how, you know, with an abundance mindset, with a sharing context, with, you know, instead of gatekeeping information, being transparent with information, how organizations can essentially provide so much that people are empowered to leave in a complete form. You know, so many of us leave our jobs when, you know, we're so broken that we can't take it anymore. And then we go into our next position. And a really great way to adopt an abundance mindset then would be to, how can we uplift people, care for people, support them to the point that they shouldn't be working here anymore. They should go off and do their next thing, or go to another position where they might grow more because we've given them everything that we have. I love that. Meaghan, can you speak a little bit to, you know, providing growth within your organization from an abundance mindset?
Yeah, I think it overlaps definitely with the transparency, because I've also, as much as we've tried to be transparent about what goes on inside the business and everyone's roles, I try to be very transparent about my journey and the access I have, and then sharing it with others who are still learning and entering this. And you're right, might find another lane that works for them or they want to work towards in the future. But I think we've also been really supportive and open about talking to people where they are and what they're looking for. Specifically, our events director started with me as a bartender opening Rain's Law Room, did a few different roles there. The nights and the physical aspect of it were definitely bearing on her at a certain point, but she also saw this lane of events business, and honestly, money we were kind of turning away because we didn't have anyone to deal with it correctly. She did a lot of research and talked to people in our community and really developed this events program, first for Rain's Law Room, and then as we branched out for the other bars. And along with that, this culture does mean a lot of people are entering jobs for the first time. So we have to be ready for mistakes, ready to support them. So on my side, that's looking at people when they're having their first event or launching their first menu, or it's their first staff meeting, running it as a general manager. You know, what's the timeline leading up to that? How can I support them or be on site? And then also, what's the feedback? The great thing about promoting people that have worked these other roles is they know what we can execute, and they're really comfortable talking to the staff about, you know, if we're scaling up to serve not 80 people, but 150, how can we really do it well? What's the stress points? Where do you guys need support? And the collaboration that comes with this culture of internal promotion and not feeling like people's jobs are on the line, you know, every time they do something new or if they make a mistake, has really let us grow. And I love seeing people, you know, in a role and in a lane that they have carved out for themselves within our company.
I mean, think of how much better we are at creating and problem solving when we're not so stressed out all the time. Like the energy that can flow through us and like through each other is, you know, not to sound like woo-woo, but like it's real. And with that collaboration, if we keep everything from each other, we can't collaborate. And then we're just siloing ourselves throughout the entire organization and community and the global community as well. Mika, talk to me.
Yeah, I was thinking about adding to Meaghan's speech that maybe the next time you have your annual, you know, review or feedback session, maybe you, as an employee, you could bring your CV or resume and go that through with your manager. So then you can plan together what would you like to have there next year. So then it's like it's a common goal to go towards improving that resume, not just something that it's talked about, but it's actually right there written, like, I want to be a manager next year. How should I progress now? How can we take this into account? Or if I want to take a leading role with the social media of our restaurant, can I do that? How can I do that? Because I'm planning to be planning to study for media later on. So maybe that you can bring those things to your workplace as well. So seeing them person as a whole.
Yeah, and I think about the opposite of abundance, I guess, would be scarcity, to having a scarcity mindset. And I think about if, you know, if a manager, if someone who has a leadership role within an organization has an individual working there come to them with their CV, with their resume saying, can you help me? We have options there. We can either say, we can either freak out and be like, they're going to leave, and then we treat them like garbage until they do leave. Or we can say, this is really exciting. I can provide mentorship. I can provide, you know, what does this person want? This person clearly wants to grow, and I wonder if they can grow within our organization. What more can they give? Miranda, can you speak a little bit to mentorship?
I can. I love that conversation of, you know, whether or not, like, how you choose to respond in that kind of an environment. And for me, one of my, like, I will always ask this question in an interview is like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? So that I can keep that in mind as we're going. And because I get a lot of opportunities sent my way of different job positions in and outside of my company. And it's nice to be able to have that conversation up front and be able to work that into the relationship that you have. So as far as mentorship goes, I think a lot of people have a lot of different definitions of that word. And for me, in a position in the past and currently where there are a lot of people seeking mentors, a lot of people posting online looking for mentors, a lot of people going to some of my closest friends saying, like, I need someone to mentor me. And I think what, you know, those people need more than anything is a leader who's dedicated, and that we need to think about the word mentorship as more of a two-way street. Like, the the kind of investment that comes from both sides of a mentorship agreement and a partnership like that is it's really important. And I think sometimes in my experience, there are people that, you know, they want questions answers, they want resources, but they're not as interested in having that two-way street relationship. And that's totally fine. We just need to be able to call it what it is. And when you do find that mentorship kind of situation where you're learning from each other, as opposed to one person is kind of on the top end of this and the other one is learning from them, it's really impactful. Like being able, like I get to learn from our team members all the time, and being able to identify people who you do want to grow and that you have the resources to give to, and that you have conversations about things that are not just work with, and it's more of a partnership. And I think it's important to look at that when you think of the word mentorship moving forward.
Yeah, I think often the terms manager, supervisor, mentor are used interchangeably, but they're not, none of those are really, if you really think about it, none of those are really the same things. But if we look at abundance and, you know, talking about that two-way street of mentorship and applying that sort of two-way information, those two information channels coming through, we can kind of start talking about constellations within our organizations and how there's so much information available within our organizations that is largely untapped. Marlena, can I put you in the spot to speak a little bit to, to like constellation management and that abundancy that's there versus maybe like top-down management?
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you think about, and to just go back to the point of mentorship, we have this conversation a lot at our leadership level, because whenever we do those surveys, we hear a lot of people requesting mentorship, and it's a big job, especially if you have if you're looking to implement a formal program. Just because somebody raises their hand to be a mentor doesn't mean that they'll be a good one. And if somebody raises their hand for a mentor, I think that you have to take that next step in a conversation to really kind of dig deeper in terms of what do they want mentorship in. And so I do think that there is a bit of that happens when you have good leadership. Hopefully, if you have a good leader, there are things that you want to emulate. There are things that you're going to learn. But I do think that with a mentor, there is generally less of an expectation, or you feel a little bit less kind of judged or put on the spot, or it may not be a working relationship where this is my manager and they're going to, think of me differently if I ask these questions or I'm looking for more information. I think that mentorship, especially when you are, I think, a person of color, when you're a woman, is generally harder. If you're looking for somebody who is experiencing things that you have or can share some insights that might make your path a little bit easier to navigate. And so I think that there are tools and apps and wonderful things out there that can help, but it is really hard work to be able to find a really good mentor and get somebody who is going to share insights that can be helpful. I think that part of that is coaching, and I think that is where we can help with folks who are people managers. Is how do we effectively coach people when we're talking to them? How do we listen empathetically? I think it also goes back to when we were talking about transparency. You want to have a human nature and an element of empathy when you're communicating with people. So I do think that all of these things are intertwined, and it's not by coincidence that we're having this type of conversation today. But I do think that coaching element, when you're looking at your managers, is something that we consistently try to make sure that we have tools to help folks with. So when we think about learning and development, when you think about abundance of your business and things that can be shared, are we effectively able to communicate with our employees? Are we able to coach them in areas where they need it? Are these helpful conversations rather than mandates and one way talk tracks? Is there really a dialogue? And then are there supporting tools to help?
Thank you. And thank you also for speaking to the steps that are necessary to start implementing a more abundant business and an abundant mindset within that. Because like this isn't small work, you know, like this is still a lot of work to change the mindset of your business, to put systems in place that support abundancy as opposed to scarcity. Rachel, can you speak a little bit to the barriers to that shift, moving from a scarcity mindset into abundance mindset?
Well, I mean, I think first things first is your mindset, right? Getting everyone on one accord and having them actually agree that this is how we're going to do. I think in the restaurant industry in general, our thoughts are profits, 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 right? And a lot of times we I guess we lay down our people for profits, right? So we allow profits to get in the way of allowing our people to shine and taking care of our people. And so that's an extreme barrier, right? It's saying that, well, I don't have it in my budget. But what I like to do, and my best clients, when they're starting restaurants, they're thinking of how can I do more for my people and look at people as a commodity versus the food that they're serving or the drinks that they're serving, right? How can I view my employees as a commodity? Because if I have happy and healthy and whole and abundant employees and I have an abundant workspace, then the same will be said for my business, right? And my business will be successful. And so adopting that mindset, though, as an owner, as a leader, it's not the norm for our industry. It just isn't. So it takes time. I think it takes education. It takes you just deciding that I'm going to be different. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to be a leader and a trailblazer in the industry. And so that takes guts, I'll say, for sure. So those are some of the barriers I have seen with really adopting that type of mindset.
Because it is very ingrained in us, that scarcity thing. Like I think about, especially if you know, are a woman or a person of color or some other marginalized population, or the intersections of those things. And, you know, there's this pressure to be the first person to do that, or the best person to do that, or, you know, I want to break this glass ceiling, I want to do this, and I want to be the person to do that. But then if you don't, it's scarcity that comes through, that you're like, oh, well, if I can't win, if I can't be first, I'm not going to do it at all. And that's not where the future is. You
right.
know, there has to be so many people, you know, breaking through those barriers and then sharing what it is that helped them to get there.
Right. Every great movement has had a leader, make themselves vulnerable and really try to change the way we view things. But it's not easy. Not at all. It definitely takes determination.
In terms of action steps, it kind of makes me think that, you know, people trying to make this change, you know, find another beverage director or find another bartender or bar owner or whomever to be like, yo, I'm trying to make this change. Will you do it with me? Can we process this together? You know?
Having like-minded people is around you, and I think that goes to your vision and your values, right? So if your company vision and values speak to these changes, first of all, you might have to change them or create them, because many restaurants or bars don't really have them. But that once you start to do that and align yourself with managers, with people, with vendors, etc., that have the same mindset as you, it won't be as difficult as you think. All right, so that's probably the first step. Understand why you're doing what you're doing, and understand what your values are, why you want to create an abundant atmosphere. And once you do that, then it'll start to align with organizations. And there are so many resources out there, like organizations like RWCF, etc., like yours, Laura, that really can help you and walk alongside you.
Yeah.
I think it's
it's
important to share that why, not just find out why, but to share that to all the employees. So then that grows community. So abundance is community. And then it grows like a symbiotic entity, like it just keeps going. And you just have to keep reminding your staff why you're doing this, why we are doing this.
Yeah, and then growth becomes not something that we do, but something that just happens.
Exactly, yeah, naturally.
Organic, yeah.
Yeah. I think that brings us into, Rachel, you speaking to the, the whys of what we do, why we do what we do, how we do what we do, and, to have those values. Moving into the wholeness aspect of it, can we speak a little bit more to how, because I think that this is really important, articulating why we open restaurants and bars, like what's the point? Like what are we doing? What matters to us, what matters to the community. Can you, I'm gonna keep calling on you a little bit to speak to the steps that a bar or restaurant or even a brand, and this is Marlena, you might, I'm certain that you have something to say about this, so please just jump in, anybody actually, about those steps to take to really start to affirm your identity as a placeholder within a larger community, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just one simple thing that I do with any restaurant, bar that I'm working with, I start by saying, what are your core values, right? Because anything that I create, whether it be policies on coaching and counseling, whether it be performance, whether it's a benefit package or anything like that, for me, those are informed by your core values. And so I challenge, and it's a challenge a lot of times, I challenge my owners to start there, create a vision, create a mission statement, create your core values. And from there, we can do everything else. And so we might add on some diversity, equity, and inclusion goals for the year. We might add on, like I said, performance measures. We might add on this is how we recruit. This is how we internalize, this is how we do our internal hiring system. There's so many things that for me are built upon that basis. And so it's almost been done backwards, right? People are just saying, I'm opening up a restaurant. I want to be profitable, right? I have this vision for food, and that's amazing because I can identify with that. Or I have a vision for these amazing cocktails, and I can identify with that. But even with that, you have to recognize that it's not a one-person show. You're going to be working with people, and you need to communicate why someone else should come and work for you, right? What's going to attract them, and why should they work with you? What is it about your business and your values that makes it so amazing to work with you, right? And so once I get them to articulate that, then it's easier to add on policies. It's easier to create systems because I always push them to go back to the why. We're going to go back to your why. And so it's very helpful for them once they decide to do it. I'll be honest, it's rough in the beginning. It's very rough, but it's a great process in the end.
I can jump here a little bit too.
Please, yeah.
Rachel, that's a really cool way of looking at it. My background is all in independent bars and restaurants, and I came up in a lot of smaller businesses. And when I started working for Hyatt, it became very clear that there were organizational systems and structures that I had never encountered before. And like it's really interesting to watch the way that they operate, where they have the core values. They have a very clear pyramid that we go through several times a year, make sure everything that we're doing is leading up to these pieces. And with them, one of the things is wellness, and they within every one of these pillars, they challenge all of the people that they work with, like all of my leadership, and hopefully the people that I am working with, I'm challenging as well, to look at how we can creatively execute programs within that pillar, and being able to harken everything that you do back to the set of things, even down from like a small percentage change in costs, you know, like where does that fit in versus where does a wellness program, like how can we inspire people to create these things is it's really cool. So I do think that that's a really great thing that that smaller businesses should be doing to kind of check themselves against what's important to them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that very much like you, Miranda, I have primarily been in larger organizations that do have that structure and have established missions and values and goals. But I've also worked in smaller agencies where that didn't exist. And I think that even when we're working sometimes with disciplines and or specific teams, and you ask them, well, what is the vision? What are we trying to accomplish? It's very hard for people to articulate. They oftentimes talk about the work that we need to do, but never really talk about the vision. And I think what has been helpful when thinking about, you know, specific teams or maybe independent businesses that are smaller is I like to ask people, if you were thinking about your organization today and you asked your team, how would they describe your culture? What would they say? Right? And get all of the background of what people think would be said. And then I asked them, you know, if you could really start from scratch and articulate the culture that you want to have, how would you describe that culture? Right. And that kind of gets them to back into the thing. So when you talk about like, I want people to have a work-life balance, right? So if that is going to be a really big pillar of your culture and what you want it to be, how do you start creating that environment? So whether that goes back to your benefits package, whether that goes back to you know, making sure that our ratios are going to be this when we're talking about hiring, whether that means, you know, you're like a Chick-fil-A that's closed on Sundays because, you know, spirituality or however that shows up in your life is really important. I think that when you think about those big brands and their identity, they start with really kind of being rooted in the things that make their culture really special. So I would really challenge leaders and owners to think about ideally starting with what they want their culture to be. But I do think that you have to understand where you are, right? So understanding how people describe that culture now and figure out what are the main areas to focus on to make those shifts.
You know, this is making me think, it's making me think a lot about like when bars and restaurants open and they find a neighborhood to open in, or they find a space that they like, but they have this vision of what they want it to be that maybe is in direct conflict with that space, or is not achievable within that space. Or even, gosh, when bars or restaurants open up and they enter a certain neighborhood that maybe isn't serving that neighborhood or that community around them. Meaghan, I would like to hear your thoughts a little bit about how the challenges around maybe shifting concept, or maybe reimagining how your bar or restaurant can operate so that you are adequately serving the community and reaching the goals that you want to, and so on and so forth. I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, I always have kind of thought about it in a way of, you know, you can have your concept and the vision for what you want to execute. And a lot of this you do have to think about ahead of time, and hopefully you've done the research, because while I haven't been part of it, I have seen the places that open in neighborhoods that it's just not a fit for many reasons, or immediately have clashes with the neighbors, or a culture that they're trying to bring in that's not fitting. But still, even where we've been more successful in that way, it's kind of 80-20. I still think you have to have about 20% that you're ready to adjust or move away from. If it's more than that, it's kind of, I think, a bigger maybe iteration problem that you might have, but a need for iteration. And that can be what people are in that neighborhood are looking for, which sometimes you want to open this very calm, you know, kind of date spot, cocktail bar, all seated, and you're always fighting this battle that people want to come with bigger groups, or they want to stay later than your hours, or they're knocking on the door before 5 o'clock. So do you actually need to open at 4? You know, is there this kind of window that you're missing? And in terms of the staff, are they coming in at the right times? I always think about the volume of bars, and I always see menus that clearly cannot be executed in the space that they're in. And maybe that's they don't have enough wells. Maybe there's too many drinks on the menu. The capacity is too high for what they're trying to execute. And it's kind of like you can fight those battles weekend after weekend. And what I'm always looking for is, are we running into the same problem every Thursday, Friday night? Or did we have an off night and we'll have to recover from that and see what's wrong? But I do see places where you're kind of always fighting the same battles instead of saying, how can we adjust, keep our vision going, keep our philosophy going, but maybe adjust the menu, the hours, how much staff we have on, and so on to really make this more successful.
And I think that's also where you can bring in like transparency with your staff and the abundance mindset of shared communication of like, you know, we're struggling to make this work, or what are your thoughts? I think this is also why it's so important to hire from the community that you're opening a restaurant in, you know, like, because, you know, the places in my old job as a distributor, like I would enter different communities that weren't my own all the time. And each place had their different, you know, different vibe or different feeling walking in. But what I saw was when a bar or restaurant was in a community that hired directly from community, like they were their neighbors, and, you know, it was like essentially a community organization serving the surrounding neighborhood, people were cared for better by the guests. You know, there was more patience, there was a lot more fun, to be honest, because like,
yeah, there's a lot more community. And, you know, I got a compliment early on at Rain's Law Room that I kind of worked backwards from. Was a bartender from Australia was visiting and was like, everyone drinks here. And I didn't really know what he meant, but in Australia, it was like very like, these are the young people bars, these are the day bars, these are the clubs. And we had people of all different ages and people on same-sex dates and a little birthday party in the corner. And for me, I started thinking, how did that all happen? And it was because there was a little, people were reflected in different ways. So they felt comfortable going on a date with someone of the same sex, or they saw an older person working and they didn't feel like it was just a young person's bar, or, you know, there was something on the menu that spoke to them and it wasn't just this, you know, stirred boozy cocktail bar, like all different things. You're going to bring more people in if more people are reflected in the space. And as a bar, you also never want to fight with your neighbors. So if there's something you can do to bring more of them in, that's definitely something you should be looking at. Or if they're not coming in, why?
mm-hmm.
If I can say something.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think Meaghan had a good point about the fact that like the sense and response approach is way better than predicting and controlling. So I think you have to be agile and adaptive, like the past year and a half or 2 years has shown us. And now that we've done it in the past year and a half, for like, because of a necessity, why don't we make that a purpose, like purposefully and collectively try to do that instead of just reacting. But now, what if we shift our mindset to actually consistently work in a sense and response manner? That would be great.
For sure. And being proactive, like, so something, this conversation is making me think of the term belonging. And you know, how if one of your core values is belonging, then like, what does that, think about what that means then for your business. If everything comes back to making sure that people feel like they belong, and they do belong in that space, be it guests, employees, managers, whomever, it essentially means that we can't ask people to fracture themselves in order to fit into that space, that they have to be their whole selves. And that kind of comes into the wholeness that we speak about too. Rachel, what are some ways that leadership and organizations can facilitate that like culture of belonging? Because I think that's bigger than just a diversity aspect, because you can look around a room and people can all look different or come from different places or whatever, but belonging kind of takes it to a deeper level. Can you speak to that a little bit?
For sure. I mean, it is almost aligned with inclusion, right? So, you know, being a diverse group of people, we can fit that bill right now, right? With as many people who are on this panel. But being inclusive also means that you have a voice at the table. And so I think one of the first steps to ensure that all of your, not only your community, your customers, your employees feel like they belong, is ensuring that they have a voice in the process, right? So, you know, doing employee engagement surveys, but also asking your employees, what do they need in order to bring their full self into work? Because you might assume that it is something and it's not. And so you might assume for a specific demographic, well, you want this. But if until you have asked that that minority or that even the majority what their needs are, you cannot speak to that. So that is something that I have always tried to do with in any HR department that I'm in. Make sure that the employees and the people that you're engaging with in general, even the community, has a voice and they are able to speak to what their needs are specifically.
Yeah, it's so important. Does anyone want to add anything else to that?
I want to mention a way that we've really, I think, looked at bringing people's whole selves into work, which is really with the menus, which is our creative expression of the drinks we want to serve. We really look at it as an experience versus just selling individual cocktails. So now that I oversee 4 venues, part of my job is to oversee each menu at each location, decide how they're going to overlap and what are the specific differences. So I work with the head bartender and all the team at each venue when we're working on a menu. And first of all, I get feedback from everyone. Servers, what are people asking for that we don't have an answer to? Barbacks and bussers, like what drinks are coming back or what food items are not really as beloved as others, but also just individual interests. So for example, at Dear Irving Gramercy, we have a lot of staff from South and Central America. So part of the menu was based on their holiday drinks that they enjoyed. This was winter 2019 from home. Like what flavors could we bring in there that they were really excited to share with the team and with the guests. At another venue, the head bartender loved Manhattans, and we made like a whole menu of both like workshop the classic, but then our own riffs and, you know, modern interpretations of that. We have a big rum fan, and they got to oversee a big rum change on the menu. And we also look just to other people's talents, which there are so many in hospitality, but photography, graphic design, you know, when you're really engaged with your staff, there's all these other skills that people can tap into and really want to bring to the table and, you know, show you another side of what they're capable of.
That's so
Being able
important.
to do, sorry, Laura.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Miranda. Yeah.
Being able to do that and utilize the strengths, especially outside of the, you know, physical menu process, it creates a much more inclusive kind of place, but it also inspires these people to kind of collaborate with each other in a fun way. Like I just was thinking of when you're mentioning that we have a property in Baltimore, and the GM realized that one of the F&B team members is a flutist, and he just like was blown away by that, had her play because she had somehow had her flute with her, and he's like, oh, like what do you need? And she's like, honestly, I need a practice space. And so they gave her a room in one of the hotels to practice in, but then they also asked her if she wanted to play during happy hour. So you come into this hotel and it's somebody who works here that's like playing this beautiful music, and it's just it feels very authentic when you can approach things from that way, and it just makes the guest experience and the experience for the team so much better.
For sure. And it doesn't really feel good to walk into a workspace and think that you have to like hide part of yourself, or even that a skill that you have isn't valued, like that feels pretty terrible, actually, especially when you have a talent that can be utilized within that space and you're overlooked because this is your role, you know, enlisting the talents, I think, and of your entire staff, and then coming back to that transparency and growth of like, how can I get you to where you want to be within the context of this? You know, like so much of this industry is like the Wild West. Like if anyone told me 15 years ago that I would have a company about mental health in the hospitality industry, I'd be like, get out of my face, you are wrong. There's no way. But there's so many pathways that we can bring people into this space, keep them here, not in a prison type way, but like in a growth oriented way. Like we're here because so many of us are here because we love this industry and we want to stay in it. And all of these pieces, the abundance, everything kind of comes into making sure people feel cared for and are cared for and whole and complete. So thank you everybody so much for being here. I want to go through and talk about some final thoughts we have and hopes that we might have for the future of hospitality industry. We could even say work in general as we move into the next few months and maybe even the next few years. So I'll start with you, Marlena.
Yeah, my hopes for the workforce, I think, is that my biggest hope is that leaders this past year is not lost on humanity, but also leaders, that there is a real emphasis on how much work really does play a part of our lives, how much it is ingrained, and making sure that we are paying attention to societal shifts, cultural shifts. We talked about inclusion, we talked about transparency. And it really is, I think, you know, as leaders, there's really been a rule book, right? If you do this, then that, or this has been the best practice and that is why we do it. And I think that we need to break all of those barriers. When we talk about solving a problem for today, understanding that that solution may not be the answer tomorrow, that we are going to have to continue to evolve as a business, as an organization, as humans. The problems that we're facing and the challenges that we're facing are just going to continue to change shape. But I think that if we are committed as leaders to make sure that there is representation, that there is inclusion, that people feel that they belong, that is the key piece. And I think in order to do that, there just has to be a level of thinking beyond yourself, stepping outside, looking at humanity, and what inspires us all as humans, not just in that individual perspective, but am I seen? Am I heard? Do I feel welcome here? I think that is ultimately what we are all looking for. And my big hope is that, you know, we're not forced to have these conversations because of what is happening outside of us, but we are having these conversations because we know that it makes us and our workspaces better.
As a therapist, what you just said was like, ding, 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 ding. You know, I think
I'm not a therapist, but I work in HR, so kind of the same thing sometimes.
It reminded me so much of how so often we are stuck in patterns, and we're stuck in emotional patterns. And you spoke about the rule book and how we it's hard to depart from those, and we think that maybe it'll change to the point that I don't have to actually give up this behavior, or I don't have to change my mind, or I don't have to restructure this. And I can tell you that that doesn't happen. Like, you have to change eventually, and either you change because you decide to, or you're changed because you are forced to. And it's stronger when it comes from inside, exactly like you said.
Absolutely. And the reason why we're in this place now is because we have been doing things the same way for so long.
Yes.
So we need to unlearn for sure.
Yes. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to Meaghan.
So my hopes for moving out of this and moving forward is for people to take the same creative lens to how they manage their business and work with their staff, as we have with recipes and drinks and food for so long, to really realize we have a chance now to look at things differently and not do the exact same thing as we've been brought up in this industry to do. And that I've gotten a lot of support and direction this year from really just honest conversations with people in this community about what has both worked and failures that they've had. And I hope to be part of that continuing conversation and bring more people into just really openly talking about what's worked and what hasn't worked for us to move forward.
Absolutely. Open communication all day. All right, Mika.
Communication, yeah. I was just about to say, like, sum up this whole thing in my head. So, you know, when the communication is open and the information flows are transparent, the decisions are made by considering everyone's advice. I think then the venue is run with, you know, naturally born networks or flat hierarchy, and it collectively creates a foundation for a healthier and a safer workplace overall that can thrive in productivity too. And, you know, being transparent is my key as well. So I share these findings that I have around the teal framework, teal worldview on the Made Hospitality platform as well to fellow bartenders. And I really look forward what the world is bringing to us, because I think there's a shift. There's a whole movement in different industries happening already, and it's landing restaurant industry as well. So keep communicating, keep bonding, create that, you know, abundance for bigger things.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Miranda?
Yeah, I think for me, my hope is that we can continue to do some work on destigmatizing a lot of these conversations in the workplace. What I focused on doing with mental health and addiction in the service industry, but I think that extends to, you know, conversations about salary, conversations about the future, feeling like you are able to be vulnerable with your colleagues and with your leadership and with the people that you're leading. Just to be able to have that really open, raw communication is going to make everything better for everyone around you, and it's going to give opportunities to yourself and to your teams that are definitely not going to be things you're going to come across in another way. And along those lines, I think it's really important that we have these conversations, but that we act. I think there's a lot of a tendency to say something like, we should do this, we want to do this, I feel like I can do this, but then like, you have to actually do the work. You have to make the call, you have to convince people to work with you on it, you have to be passionate and really drive that forward. So if it's something you want to do, now is the time, just go for it.
That's what's up though. Like right now is the time. It's because so much is up in the air and so much is changing. This is the time to like take steps, try new things, fail forward, all of that. Rachel, what are your final thoughts?
Everyone has said, you know, amazing things, but I think I agree that you have to do the work, right? Like Miranda said, you have to come prepared to do the work. And my hope is that we are the generation that is going to propel the restaurant and bar industry into a new place. So that's my goal. That's my hope. I'm definitely going to do my part. And I'm excited to provide restaurants and bars and managers and employees with resources to enable them to do the work. So that's what I'm most excited about for the future.
You know, and in you saying like providing the resources in the spirit of like abundance and transparency, like, you know, you and I work very overlapped in what it is that we do. I think what I'm so excited about is to provide resources and, you know, all of that, and then see what people do with them.
Yeah.
You know, like what, you know, who's going to take something that I put out there and just like turn it into something else entirely that's extraordinary. Like that's a really fun thing to think about, of like, you know, the imagination of that.
Yes, you put your own creativity on and your own, like I say, your own swag, your own sprinkle on it. And then it turns into something else and morphs into something even more dynamic. That's the beauty of this industry, right? You know, baking a cake has always been baking a cake, but at the end of the day, right, there's been so many different variations and iterations of it because you're putting your own creativity on it. And so the same can be said for resources that we are providing right now. So it's amazing.
Since we are at Tales of the Cocktail, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what Meaghan just said about like we need to take our creativity that we do with cocktails and start putting it, like, it makes me think of the mezcal Negroni, or the Negroni build in general, and the absolute beast that thing became of like, is it equal parts? Is it not? There's competitions over how to make it, or should you just not use mezcal at all? Or should mezcal even be in cocktails? I want conversations around like structures within how we treat each other, how we communicate. You know, I want that bar fight.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh my gosh.
I would love to watch. I mean, I would love to watch that kind of stuff. Well,
What's the juice off version of this? Like
exactly. This is like the debate team in high school. Bunch of like nerds making it cool. No, but really have these conversations with people within your community, with your colleagues, with your peers, your managers, your friends. Like, if you want to try something new in your bar or restaurant or your brand or anything, like, give it a go. Talk to people in your space and be like, let's try this. Let's process how it goes, and we can make decisions from there. You know, it's not a lot of the ramifications, I think, that come from working in a way that's stagnant can be a little bit doom and gloom, but making changes to those does not have to be at all. Like, it can be quite a lot of fun. I mean, I know that I wouldn't do this work if I didn't get some sort of weird joy from it, because I think it's exciting to see that growth and that change happen. Well, great, everyone. Thank you so much. This was so great. I can't wait to go back and watch it. For those of you at home, there are resources for you. Right now, you should be looking at a slide that links to Mate Hospitality, Measured HR, and Healthy Pour. You can find more resources in these spaces. And now you're looking at a slide that has all of us and how you can reach us on Instagram, who we are, and where we come from. But yeah, there are resources available to you right now in this slide. You can use this link to continued reading, organizational standards that we like to live by, a lot of information. So please take some time and dig through that and let it spark some imagination for you to do the work and do the thing. So thank you very much.
Call for action, right? Call for action.
This is the call. This is the call to action.
You need to do the work as well.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because like, it's an ongoing conversation within this industry that a lot of people are saying things need to change, but people aren't actually making the changes. So it's now is the time.
Now's the time.
We are the change we've been waiting for.
That's right.
Agreed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.